Antara, let me call Rajiv sir and Hitesh sir also, and we will start.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir. Good morning,
Yeah.
sir. Thank
Good
you.
morning.
Thank you for joining. Good morning. Just I am waiting for Hitesh, sir.
Okay.
You didn't pick up the call. Let
Just
me.
checking whether you can hear me. So
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's completely audible. Lovely. Antara, I think we should start and let Hitesh sir join. I'm just trying to catch.
Sure, sir. I'll start. Okay. So, very pleasant good morning to one and all. Thank you for being with us today. This is Antara Kundu, Project Executive, South Asian Institute for Advanced Research and Development. From the oldest members of the institution to everyone every new face, we extend the heartiest welcome to our one-day international brainstorming session on strengthening the economy of SAARC nations through resource mobilization. This webinar has been jointly organized by South Asian Institute for Advanced Research and Development in association with SAARC Culture Center, Sri Lanka. On behalf of my team, I sincerely thank and acknowledge every one of you who extended help and support to us. Without taking any more of your time, may I now request Mr. Arindam Ray, Director, Academic Affairs, SAIARD, to say a few words. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Antara. Good morning, everyone. Welcome in the second international collaboration between the SAARC and SAIARD and the brainstorming session on the strengthening the economy of SAARC nations through resource mobilization. I want to say some few words regarding this topic. That mobilization of resource means the freeing up of locked resources. Every country has economic resources within its territory known as domestic resources, but often they might not be available for collective use. The percentage of resource used when compared to the potential is often very low. For a country to grow, identification and mobilization of its resource is very necessary. It should be available for use and for central and state level planning also. The proper utilization of these resources lead to the generation of economic resources like savings, investment, capital, tax, etc. So today's topic is very relevant, and we all are expecting for a very successful brainstorming session. Thank you, everyone, once again. Over to you, Antara.
Thank you so much, sir. May I now request Dr. Bishwajit Roy Chaudhary, Chairman, SAIARD and IIEST, to say a few words. Over to you, sir.
First of all, thank you, Antara, and I heartily welcome on behalf of South Asian Institute for Advanced Research and Development for the second international collaboration with the SAARC Cultural Center. And for that collaboration, first of all, I share my sincere thanks to the Secretary General of SAARC as well as the Director of SAARC Cultural Center, Professor Prashanti ma'am, and also the distinguished guests, distinguished speakers, those who have joined here from the different corners or different cornerstones of the people, that from Sri Rajiv Ranjan Misra sir, IS Honorable former Director General from National Mission for Clean Ganga, and as Government of India, Professor Mr. Hitesh Vaidya sir, though he still not be able to join, maybe due to some busyness, from Director National Institute of Urban Affairs, Mr. Ajit Pai, from the distinguished expert from the Niti Aayog, Government of India, Sri K. Siddharth sir, thinker and strategic thinker, advisors to the Government of India and the different, and also he is a writer, art scientist too, and Mr. Muhammad Anwar sir from the Bangladesh Prime Minister's Office, and my friend Chris from Australia. He is the co-founder of Global Opportunities Commercialization, and also Dr. Yasin Samim sir from Afghanistan, and he is now also he was the former Education Minister of Afghanistan, and Professor Ami Upadhyay, Honorable Vice Chancellors of Baba Saheb Ambedkar Open University from Gujarat. So for this platform, and those who have joined first time in this, I heartily welcome to all of you and all of the participants throughout the world, those who have joined for this particular event. The concept which we have basically designed for this particular webinar, particular brainstorming session, that is the strengthen the economy of SAARC nations through resource mobilization, is basically the brainchild. One kind on the behind the concept of that brainchild is that we know that the SAARC nations are ecologically rich. In case of human resource, they are rich, but in case of economically, they are sometimes really right now, still now they're even poor, and they have to do they have to take in lots of initiatives for the development of their economy and for the. But what is the reason? That I think that will be the main prelude. That will be the main focal theme of that this brainstorming session, and definitely we have to identify what are the basic lackings are there, what are the basic drawbacks are there, on the basis of which we are still in informed, calling us as the developing countries, but developing nations. So it should not be applicable, and all that. There are several delegates from the different countries are there, and hopefully today's discussion will obviously come out some positive vibes, as that we can modify, we can change our policy, whether we have to do something extra, whether we have to give some extra inputs, whether we have to change our policy advocacy in all that. I think this should be come out through this discussion, and obviously through this discussion, whatever the outcomes will generate, we will document it, and after that we will share it to the SAARC Secretary General, and along with that the SAARC board, as that they can explain, they can discuss on it, on that issues regarding their another governing body meetings and all that, and on the basis of that they can modify their policy and say. So with this concept, we have started this webinar, and as you know that from the very beginning of our institution, SAIARD is continuously doing these kind of intellectual discussions, and as that, and connecting the people throughout the country and throughout the globe. So as that, we will get some, our participants, those who have joined from the different corners, they can get some knowledge inputs, they can get some brainstorming sessions within their enlisting knowledge. So as that, they can also help, it will be helpful for to think in a different way, in a different manner. I must say that Professor Sri Rajiv sir was long back experience since the beginning of his career. He is also associated in the government organization as an IAS. Sri K. Siddharth sir also remain as a scientist as well as a thinker and strategy makers. Ajit Pai sir doing a very wonderful initiatives regarding the changeover of the Indian economy, and also his contributions as a Niti Aayog expert members is remarkable also. And I will also say Professor Prashanti ma'am, she is also as a cultural center director. She is also trying to bring some changes. So every people, I mean to say that every people wants to change, wants to do something worth through their thinkings and all that. And SAIARD try to bring that, all the cornerstones in the single platform, as that in future we can give something policy advocacy related issues to the respective governments of the respective countries, from either it may be Afghanistan, either it may be Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal, etc., etc. So as that collaboratively we can develop and unite sections, unite humanity grounds, as that we can also support our next generations, and that means that is, I think, it should be the actual meaning of sustainability. So with this respect, I will no longer extend my discussions here, and I would like to most prefer to hear from all of you, basically on the focal theme of this event. So with this, once again, I congratulate, I thanks to all of you for joining with us and for giving this opportunity to hear. Thank you. Well, over to Alpira, please. And Hitesh sir, I will just inform due to the secretariat meeting, secretariat meeting of MOHUA, I mean Ministry of Urban, the director of NIUA, Hitesh sir, will not be able to join. So you please continue. Please in his presence. Yes. Thank you. Over.
Sure, sir. Okay, so today our first guest is Professor P. Narangora, Director, SAARC Culture Center, Sri Lanka. She is a professor in Fine Arts in the Department of Fine Arts of the University of Kelaniya. She is one of the pioneering research scholars in the field of fine arts, covering many areas and seeking the interconnectedness of the art, society, and the culture, especially focusing on Sri Lanka and Asia. She was graduated from the University of Kelaniya and obtained her Master of Science degree from the Postgraduate Institute of Archaeology of the same university. She pursued her PhD at the University of West California in the USA and earned her PhD with a merit due to the research scholarship she demonstrated throughout. Apart from that, she bears several memberships in renowned organizations, member of the American Association for Religious Studies, member of the UNESCO International Dance Council, and a life member of the Royal Asiatic Society, Sri Lanka branch. At university level, she has been the secretary of the Research and Ethics Review Committee of University of Kelaniya since 2016 and elected as the chairman for 3 years. She is currently holding the post of director, SAARC Cultural Center, under the purview of South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. I cordially invite you to share your thoughts with us, ma'am. Professor P. Narangora. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you so much for the invitation and the pleasant explanation about me. Very good morning to you once again, Chairman of the South Asian Institute of Advanced Research Study, Dr. Chowdhury, and our keynote speaker for the day, Mr. Mishra, former Director of the Ministry of Jal Shakti. I suppose the water and energy, the most important element of the world, water. Plenary speaker, Mr. Vaidya, Director of this National Institute of Urban Affairs, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and the distinguished panelists, presenters, and the participants from all over the South Asian nations. And it is my prestige and the pleasure to be part of SAIARD, along with the SAARC Cultural Center and its mandate to restore and promote the SAARC culture of the South Asian nations under one canopy, being the major hub. However, I believe today that the chairman has selected the best topic for the day and for the decade to identify the venues and avenues to ways and means of mobilizing the resources among our member states to say more precisely the South Asian nations. As one of the members very rightly said, we have abundance of resources in South Asian nations, but the problem is how we can mobilize these resources is the problem today we have faced so tremendously. Otherwise, we would have been raised into a very good South Asian one nation decades before. However, it is evident that the South Asian territory dwells the most resourceful geographical contour in the world with regard to the multiple resources and the sources as well. In this, we cannot categorize it as one or two. It has many, including water as one of the most resourceful energies, as well as we all know that we cannot sustain without water. Throughout the history, South Asian nations have been the role model for these resources, sharing resources, mobilizing resources, not only the material resources, but the knowledge, techniques, skills, goods, and even human resources. The significance is that they all have contributed to the development, sustenance, and the establishment of individual, independent, sovereign states where people live in with full of solidarity. We have to respect it. One significant example is the Buddhism and the Buddhist views. When the King Dharmashoka became the ardent Buddhist during the 3rd century BCE, as we all are aware of it, he not only conducted the Third Buddhist Council to restore the Buddhist teachings, that is not for his personal gainings or personal privilege or the prestige, but for the benefit of the nations in the entire world, in particular South Asia. He spread the great message among 16 Janapadas, including Sri Lanka. By sending it, he did not expect anything other than spreading the great message of the Gautama Buddha. By sending, after about 2 centuries, Sri Lanka paid the utmost courtesy by disseminating the same knowledge among 18 members, and to the Bharata Mata by sending missionaries towards 18 Janapadas, as I told, from Sihala Rama at Nagarjuna Konda, from the down south of India, as revealed by the Chetiyagara inscription at Nagarjuna Monastery even today. Our brethren have proved it even today. And I don't have to say we have evidence. As you are all aware, that Sri Lanka is facing a calamity and agony today. In this difficult time, for several reasons I must not mention here, me, myself as a Sri Lankan, being the host government to represent the SAARC Cultural Center, grateful on behalf of the Sri Lankan nation to the great South Asian nations that came to the forefront to extend their support by sending forth needy basic elements like food, medicinal drugs, treatments, so far and so forth, fuel, gas, and everything where we are suffering today, with all the plenty of resources for the benefit of the Sri Lankan people. It is simply a reason for us to be good and proud to be Asians, especially the South Asians, who have proved throughout the history, prolonged history, that their generosity is there on top of everything to meet the needs of the South Asian nations as one, not as several or departed nations, geographically distributed people. However, what we must not forget is that as nations in South Asia, we need to admit and accept that we have been labeled as either underdeveloped, third world, poor, and many more to go. I should not mention it here. But nevertheless, we can rise as one nation if we can identify more precisely to be identifying the ways and means of mobilizing our resources more and more for the benefit of the sustainability of our community. That would be worthwhile to rise as one nation. Because we were one nation long before. I mean, from today, even in the history, we have proved that Indian subcontinent, we belong to the Indian subcontinent. But nowadays, we have separated from geographical contours, we have boundaries, but there are no demarcations at all when it comes to the humanity. Therefore, there are two major things that we can, if we can do. Number one, we have to analyze all these labels, denominations given to the South Asian nations are by the Europeans, not by any of the Asian nations. Because we know how rich we are, what resources we have. And number two, we need to realize that South Asia is gifted with abundance of energies and our resources, and particularly we have not identified on how we can manage such resources. That is what we are lacking today. We need to understand those plentiful resources we have to share and mobilize equally where the resources are in an inadequate state, and then we can have a well-balanced society, Asian society and Asian nation, where we can rise as a one rich nation. Therefore, the nations who have the capacity to develop it can help other member states to sustain by providing the required sources and resources. As the SAARC nations, SAARC cooperation, the process of mobilization has made an easy and provided some convenient platforms through the different regional centers and the specialized bodies that we need to know. And we can positively utilize and upgrade the quality and the best practices, my dear sirs and madam. For example, the SAARC Energy Center, SAARC Development Fund, and me myself is representing the SAARC Cultural Center. And we can work beyond the boundaries to upgrade by mobilizing the resources among the member states very generously and having a very common treaties and the organizations like other research and advancement organizations like SAIARD. We can initiate such projects to disseminate knowledge and infrastructure facilities to the member states. We have the tools, we need the resources. And on the other hand, I must say, culture plays a major significant role in this regard, because culture does not have boundaries. throughout the history, we have proved that. From the Indus Valley culture, where we are now, we have commonalities and common characteristics that we can rise as one Asian nation. And we need to know that it has not been evolving any provoking thoughts throughout our history. It has been acting for the benevolence of the society, not as enemies. That friendship, that two-way or multiple-way intercourse should be sustained by identifying the dissemination and mobilizing pathways more and more that is needed today more than any other day. And culture, like performing arts, visual arts, languages, and religions, along with the traditional technology. We have utilized a lot of man and energy that we pursued throughout our history to achieve today's victories. As we enjoy the fullest solidarity as independent states today, we should not forget that that is because of the common and sharing elements that we are enjoying from the history today, unconditionally and continuously. And therefore, it has proved with marvels the great histories, heritage, food, cuisine, and that has attracted the entire world to date. When it comes to Asian cuisine, Indian food, Nepalese food, Sri Lankan food, the spicy aroma fragrance has been well known for centuries for their genuine and authentic cultural practices. And the lush grown tea, coffee, wheat, rice, and many more crops are plentiful resources that can be initiated with identified pilot projects. And I must not reiterate, rice is a wonderful source of food crop all over South Asian soil that has been gifted by the nature to sustain the entire South Asian community. And it is our staple food. And we can upgrade the lifestyle of our community with full of nutrients. No doubt about that. And we can prove that we are a first world nation by having that kind of an energetic process of mobilization of these resources, technology, skills, and many more to go. With that hope and with all the best wishes, I congratulate the second international conference and brainstorming session in search of ways and means of strengthening the economy of South Asian community, more fully identified as SAARC nation through resource mobilization. Maybe it is economic, maybe it is political, diplomatic, cultural, or any other delegation that can help the nations in need. Have a wonderful conference. All the best to you and enjoy. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So
Thank you.
our next guest is Shri Rajiv Ranjan Mishra, IAS, former Director General, National Mission for Clean Ganga, Ministry of Jal Shakti, Government of India. Since 2018, he had spearheaded Namami Ganges program, an integrated river rejuvenation approach with multiple activities spanning 11 states of the Ganga River Basin and creating a model program for river rejuvenation in India. He has also been responsible for various policy level interventions, including the ecological flow notification of 2018 and bringing to completion multiple projects, Aviralta and Nirmalta, of River Ganga. He had made pioneering effort for developing a framework for planning for river cities by mainstreaming river and water into urban master plans. A mechanical engineer from IIT Kanpur, he had in the past looked after various departments at state level, such as irrigation, municipal administration and urban development, infrastructure and investment at secretary or principal secretary, and worked in development and regulatory positions at field level. He has attended many national and international level trainings or seminars on various subjects. I cordially invite you to share your thoughts and opinions with us, sir. Over to you, Mr. Rajiv Ranjan Mishra.
Thank you, Antara. Dr. Biswajit Roy Chaudhary, Professor Prasanti ji, all the distinguished experts, delegates, and participants, a very, very warm greeting from my side. While listening to Professor Prasanti ji, I think you have really laid down the spirit of this conference by talking about cultural bond and oneness. I think that is something we all have to build upon that. As we all know, I think it's a great opportunity to share our thoughts, and also I think after this, when the distinguished panelists will discuss upon more specific issues, perhaps we'll also come out with a very good roadmap about what all needs to be done. We are all very much aware about the identity of South Asia. It's home to more than 1.8 billion people. Roughly, if you see, it's almost 1/4 of the global population, 23 to 25%. So we are significant. There is no doubt about that we matter. I mean, we have a huge sizable population and a huge human capital with us. We also have, I think someone rightly told, we also have good access to natural resources. It's not that we cannot find fault with nature or God, that we were not given natural resources. We have huge natural resources, whether it is water, whether it is mineral, whether it is forest, whether it is productive land. I mean, when we talk of land, I can just quote from India, the Indo-Gangetic plain. It's one of the most fertile plain with 200-mile width. So it's a huge fertile land. So similar thing is there in other countries also, and human capital. But at the same time, when we are here to deliberate upon resource mobilization, utilizing the resource, I think whatever is endowed in this region, the natural resources and the human capital, I think we need to utilize them properly. I mean, there's a lot of scope to further improve, and there has been a lot of improvement. I don't say that we have not improved, because if you look at India, we have something like 18% of global population, only India I am talking, but we are having access to only 4% of fresh water, global fresh water. So I think we have to be careful. Water is there to meet our needs, but if we are not careful, water will not be sufficient. So I think that is there. If we look South Asia as a whole, perhaps we will be around 25% of the global population and around 5% access of the global water. So I think we have to be also a little cautious. Similarly, I think there is a huge variation in terms of forest resources, with Bhutan having something like 65% of the land in the forest, but other countries do not have so much. But if you look at the global forest land, I think South Asia, though we are huge in terms of population, we don't have so much of forest land. So I think that's again something we have to be little cautious about managing it. So I think these are the management challenges of our resources. So that's one common thread perhaps which binds all the countries in this region. Similarly, I think another thing I was thinking, which is very common to all of us, in terms of challenge, is regular occurrence of disasters. We are now having the privilege of having the SAARC Cultural Center Director here, but there is also SAARC Center for Disaster Management, which is located in India presently. I mean, it was in several countries, and that has come to that. So if you look at, I think this region, I think different countries, we cannot go so much in detail, but as a region, we have faced all kinds of disasters, you can say. Hydrometeorological disasters, floods and tsunamis and cyclones are very common. At the same time, earthquakes and landslides also take place. So I think hydrometeorological disasters as well as geological disasters. So I think we have been prone to that. And if you look at last few decades, perhaps we have come a long way in terms of developing our own capacity to prepare for the disasters, and then the loss of life and property is much less. But when we look at resource, when we look at economy of the country, I think we have to be also very cautious. We have to be also flagging in our deliberation about how we prepare and how we mitigate the impact of the disaster. Because if we are not able to do that, I think in one go we will lose a huge part of our GDP. So I think that becomes a very, very important part of our discussion. Some time back, quite some time back, I was associated with Disaster Management Center in our Academy of Administration in Government of India. And I also had a chance to visit Bhutan and also Sri Lanka in the context of developing some sort of improved response among the civil servants, among the responders. I mean, whether it's police or this thing, which is basically called incident command system. So I think I had some chance to visit these two countries. Sri Lanka, in fact, has a minister for disaster management. I think Bangladesh also has a ministry for disaster management. And all these countries have really developed good nodal system. In India, we have National Disaster Management Authority as well as Home Ministry looking into this very closely. So I think compared to what was the condition in early 90s, we have come a long way. The cyclones do not harm us so much, save most of the people. Last tsunami, 2004 was a great challenge for all of us. I think Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh also led to a good system, whether it's Indian warning system. So I think a good framework has emerged, and I think we are working in that direction. Similarly, if we just, I am trying to flag a few areas which I feel source point of view, forest resources. Again, that becomes very important. And when we are talking of disaster, the forests also have suffered a lot of, I mean, there is a lot of improvement, but we also have a lot of challenges because of intense pressure of population, fire accidents. Post-plantation management also we can improve. Afforestation has to be done scientifically. In case of Ganga rejuvenation, we tried to link forestry program with river rejuvenation. So we also look at along the river. Institute of India, we developed that kind of detailed or reserved areas. I think there is a lot of interplay of trees with the agriculture. So I think one has to also look at agroforestry, look at some of the good practices where we can perhaps develop that. Another related thing, perhaps I will like to. I think the region is has several biodiversity hotspots, whether it is the mountainous region of Himalayas or Hindu Kush, whether it's Indo-Gangetic Plain I talked about, or the Western Ghats, which are again very important. And another very important feature, common feature some of the countries have is mangroves. Sundarbans, I think one of the real, what you can say is a kind of boon given by nature or God to us is Sundarbans, which India and Bangladesh, that these mangroves have to be saved. These mangroves have to be conserved because they are a great resource. And actually, they also save us from several cyclones and other natural disasters. So I think that becomes very important. Similarly, Sri Lanka and Maldives also, we have got extensive mangroves, and I think that there is need to protect them and then protect them as their resource, not simply because we need greenery. So I think that becomes very, very important thing. And then again, I will like to, I think Madam referred to King Asoka and then reaching out to different regions in his period. I just remember in his time, Samrat Asoka, it's quite, I mean, more than 2000 years ago. In one of his rock edicts, he had actually noted down several species which should be protected. So when we are talking of aquatic species or Wildlife Protection Act of the modern days, I think that was perhaps the earliest documentation of certain animals and certain species should be protected, should not be killed indiscriminately. And in that, I will like to mention Gangetic dolphin, which we call Sinsumar. So Gangetic river dolphin, a very, very unique species. This is our national aquatic animal of India. And again, whether it is Nepal or Bangladesh or several other countries, you have this particular species. And other day I was in another conference organized by WWF for the regional cooperation among India, Bangladesh and Nepal about conservation of river dolphins, Gangetic dolphins. So I think some multilateral, bilateral discussion on different sectors are already taking place, and I think it's very good to discuss. So we have also now launched a Project Dolphin, like we have Project Tiger, very successful project in India. So Project Dolphin also has been launched in the similar way. So I think that's again an area where these are all our resources. Often we look at water for the waterways, and inland waterways, again, I think there is a huge potential, and then this has been done right from historical days, that waterways have been used. But we have to be also a little cautious about the ecology, whether these kind of vessels, and then it's not either or. We can do both, but we'll have to find some patience and find some reasons and expertise to do that. So I think coming back now to the water, because whether it is disasters, whether it is food, whether it is agriculture, whether it is energy, I think water is at the center of all of it. And now we are all very concerned about climate change. We all know, we all feel the impact of climate change, not only the academically, but actually in real life. In India, Delhi is seeing a severe heat wave kind of condition. I think so. What was being predicted of the extreme weather events, we are all facing in different parts of the globe. So now in that situation, what is the condition of our water security? How we are actually planning to deal with that, so that we have enough water, and water security is not only required for the drinking purpose. I think it has a huge impact upon rural household, economic, water security, urban, and also environmental aspects. So I think that becomes very important. And then when we are talking of climate change, it is very nicely said by Mr. James that if climate change is a shark, water is its teeth. So impact of climate change actually you feel through water, because immediately you will start feeling either through the huge rainfall, floods, or through drought. So I think that is something which is very important to say. And then in that context, I will like to share some experience about rivers, because rivers are perhaps the most important actor in the entire realm of water management. All these countries in the region, we have huge number of rivers. If we talk of India, Ganga, I had a chance to work with River Ganga, which is the national river, and then this is more than 2,500 kilometers long. But its basin is really huge. It contains 43% of the population of India. So attempt to clean this river, attempt to rejuvenate this river was very important, and it was taken up. Similarly, I am also aware about all the countries, especially let's say Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, and Nepal, several attempts have been also done to clean its river. I think last year Sri Lanka also talked about, started a program for, if I am correct, Surakimu Ganga. So that was perhaps announced, launched, and then it's a national program on conservation of rivers in Sri Lanka. I think Ganga again has certain meaning in Sinhalese and certain meaning in that country. So I think it also denotes river. In India, when we talk of Ganga, we talk of all other rivers also. So in south of India, even if it is not Ganga, but there are several rivers which are named after Ganga. Similarly, I think Bangladesh and Nepal, we share this basin, so we have a very, very strong connect with this river, and then sharing of this water, and then also its biodiversity. So I think Bangladesh also is having several programs for cleaning Buri Ganga, and also around the several rivers in Dhaka. So I think those programs are going on. Nepal is having a very successful intervention about Bagmati cleaning, where they have actually also brought a lot of volunteers along with the government thing. When we looked at Namami Gange program as a kind of integrated river rejuvenation program, it has got several components. One component is about looking at pollution aspect. And I think we are talking of resource. See, if you do not control pollution, actually you will keep on spending much more money to utilize this water. So we try to infuse this thing in a more sustainable way. So when you construct an STP, you should be in a position to operate and maintain it for long term. So we have also introduced in wastewater management concept of PPP. Again, I think I'm just naming some of these things because there could be an occasion to actually share this particular experience with the other countries when this river cleaning exercise comes. So for the first time, there are lots of governance reforms which we have done in this thing, and also introduced private sector into that. And initially it was very difficult, but subsequently we are getting good response, and water quality also has been improving. You have to also look at flow. So I think the concept of environmental flow has evolved in India, and now we have declared that we are also working for other rivers. So I will also request to flag this as another area of exchange of knowledge and experience about to rejuvenate a river. You don't have to only clean it, you have to also restore some of its flow. So I think the discussion on environmental flow, and they are all very clearly linked with economy. So I think that is something which is very important. We can discuss that. And then how you bring people close to this river. I talked about Bagmati. In Ganga also several such programs have happened about bringing them close to people, making people responsible for this particular program. So I think that's again something at present also we are organizing an online quiz program on. There is a portal. I think all of you, I mean, I can share that idea of that portal, because anyone can visit that portal, and there are lots of material on that, lots of games, lots of creative things to engage young people. We call it CLAP, C-L-A-P, CLAP 4 is the digit, clapforganga.com. www.clapforganga.com. If you go on that, you will get lot of information, lot of music, lot of cultural things which you can see. And as the head of SAARC Cultural Center is here in India, Indira Gandhi National Center of Art and Culture, they have also started a project on riverine culture. So I think looking at the literature, looking at, I think to revive a river, you also have to go back. You have to also, apart from these projects I'm talking about, you have to also rekindle the spirit of responsibility and attachment people had with these rivers. Not only in India, all the countries, every river has its own story. Every river has its own cultural importance. So I think once again, we need to reconnect that thing, and that kind of project can also be very important. Looking at all these things, I also tried to recollect and develop a kind of framework, a kind of paradigm for rejuvenation of rivers, saying that you have to reimagine what all is there, rejuvenate and reconnect. So I think that's again something which we can perhaps discuss, and then perhaps in future we can also look at different rivers in different countries and what kind of programs are going on, because we have launched a very massive program in India, and then the results are also visible. There is no time to get into details, but 2,500 kilometer long river, you can understand the dissolved oxygen level is more than 5 milligram per liter now. So I think we are able to maintain that for the entire length of the river. BOD also is the most of the places it is less than 3 or not exceeding 4 milligram per liter. So I think there is an improvement, but we have a long way to go. Now to close that, how we can sustain all that? So I think because Hitesh is perhaps not able to join, I will also, because now I am giving some sort of a strategic advice to National Institute of Urban Affairs. I think another major resource, another major area for all these countries, urbanization. It's a challenge, it's an opportunity. The cities are centers of our economy, and cities will keep on growing. So now how they should grow, how we should plan our cities. So there is a lot to learn, lot to work on the planned growth of these cities. So there is a lot we can perhaps share with each other. We have got a smart city program, we have got river city program. And now recently NIU is also trying to look at hill cities. So I think they have just given a call for having a kind of meeting with experts and all that in the month of June. So we will also like to look at the hill cities. So I think in all these regions, either they are river cities or hill cities or other cities. So how we can actually work together to develop a sustainable urbanization, because as you know, climate change, its impact will be most clearly visible on the cities. Cities are heat centers. The IPCC report also very clearly mentions, the 6th report of IPCC very clearly mentions that. It also very clearly mentions for South Asia that heat waves and humid heat stress will be more intense and frequent during 21st century. So I think we have very clear prediction. We have very clear way to know about it. So I think all the trade, all the economic growth will depend upon how well we manage our natural resources and how we harness, how we also develop a thinking for sustainability. So there could be lot of these things which I am saying. There could be an area of exchange. There could be great way of working on the cultural issues. There could be a great way of working upon the water thing. Energy is again very important. The recent crisis globally, all the countries are suffering about the high price of the import of the fuel. So I think we have to become self-reliant. We have to go for greener transition into the greener energy. So I think these are all things which will help us in the long run. And on water, on urbanization, we can certainly have a kind of forum where we can share a lot of things. We have created a River City Alliance recently in National Institute of Urban Affairs, funded by National Mission for Clean Ganga. Now that River City Alliance is not limited to only Ganga cities, it's covering every part of India, different parts. So I think there could be a scope to include some of the cities from this region, I think the willing cities, as part of that River City Alliance, and start using that forum to further go ahead. We could also look at sharing of this knowledge by developing certain case studies and then learning little better managerial practice from each other and then go ahead. I think this conference is a very good starting point, giving us a chance to work together, to learn together. There are several forums we all know of cooperation on SAARC. But certainly the panel discussion which is now going to be followed, where eminent experts are there, I think we will get many more ideas about how exactly we can list down. And then I once again wish all the best to SAIARD as well as SAARC Cultural Center for organizing it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. So now we are going to move for our technical session. But before starting our technical session, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Sri Rajiv Ranjan Mishra and Professor P. Narangora for joining us today and supporting us by all means. Thank you so much for your cooperation.
Thank you. Thank you.
On that,
all the best.
yes, thank you, sir. On that note, let's start our technical session. Today, we have a panel discussion, and this session will be chaired by Professor A. Upadhyay. She is currently working as the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University, Ahmedabad, Gujarat. She is a professor in English, director of School of Humanities and Social Sciences. She has an MPhil, PhD, DA and YS, and she is an Indian classical dance Kathak Visharad and Siksha Visharad. She has offered her services at national as well as state level in various capacities in the committees formed by MHRD, UGC, NAC, Gujarat State Education Department, etc. She has been awarded with Lifetime Achievement Award by AIPC for exemplary contribution in the field of art and education, and the Best Vice Chancellor in Open and Distance Learning, and many more. And the key panelist for this panel discussion session is Ajit Pai. He is a expert economics and finance, Niti Aayog, Government of India, where he heads economics and finance and oversees public disinvestment and performance of central public sector enterprises. He is also consultant to the vice chairperson of Niti Aayog, is the nodal officer for the Ministry of Finance, is subsidiary departments and handles master related to the World Bank, IFC, IMF, ADB, NDB, OECD, and the G20. Mr. Pai is also chairman, Delhi Urban Art Commission, a statutory body created by an Art of Parliament in 1973 to advise the government of India in a matter of preserving, developing, and maintaining the aesthetic quality of urban environmental design. Second panelist is Mr. M. Anwar Hossain, Executive Chairman, Kenby Limited, and former Asia Regional Director at BRAC International, Bangladesh. He is a strategist, vision-oriented initiator, and a rights-oriented development and humanitarian professional grown in Bangladesh, having 18 years of experiences currently since June 2021, working as the Executive Chairman of the Center for Business Incubation Limited, and as the team leader for strengthening private sector investment in CC in Bangladesh, Public-Private Partnership Authority of the Prime Minister's Office of Bangladesh. Prior to this, he served as the Asia Regional Director of BRAC International, oversaw the development and implementation of organization strategies and country programs across the Asia region. The third key panelists are Mr. K. Siddharth, strategic thinker, art scientist, and advisor to the government, strategic thinker, management consultant, perception management consultant, thought leadership trader, and advisor to several international and state governments. He is a mentor of over 1,600. I kindly request everyone to mute themselves. Okay, he is a mentor of over 1,600 civil servants, film personalities, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and author of 45 books and 116 research articles. The next panelist is Dr. C. Sotiropoulos, co-founder and CEO, Global Opportunities Commercialization Australia. Dr. Chris has extensive expertise in global commercialization of innovative education, healthcare, and technology products and services. He served as co-founder and CEO of Global Opportunities and director of Mainstage Director Australia, APAC Health and Golden Bridge advisory organizations that deliver entrepreneurship, funding, commercialization services, as well as their own products internationally. And last but not the least, the last key person panelist is Dr. Yasin Shamin, Senior Governance and Development Expert, Afghanistan. He has a master in international relations and a master in public administration and international development. He worked various government and non-government positions, senior policy and technical advisor, director resources mobilization, general government organizations. Currently, he works as a freelance consultant with international organization. I cordially request Dr. A. Upadhyay to chair the session. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Antaraji. It's really a matter of pleasure and privilege to be a part of this such wonderful brainstorming session where everybody would be presenting their views related to very much apt concern, need of the time topic. We know it very well, not taking much time because we are here to listen the panelists. The life is like, when we talk about SAARC country from the layman point of view, if you look at it, it's like a jigsaw puzzle that everybody has a piece of that game in our hand. We have a complete picture. We visualize the complete picture and we have to put those pieces of that particular game at their own places. And then the picture gets complete. I think in the same way, when we talk about resource mobilization, sharing of resources, and growing together, it's very, very important that we revisit certain policies, we revisit our idea. When we talk about resources, be it the financial resources, be it human resources, water resources, in form of rivers or anything, we heard the speakers also who presented their views on sharing of cultural resources, water resources, human resources, etc. So now we have a set of panelists who will present their views. I would be very happy to invite one by one. First of all, I would request Mr. Ajit Par, Distinguished Expert, Economics and Finance, Niti Aayog, Government of India, to come forward and present his views. So please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm indeed really delighted to be as part of this panel on a subject that is very, very relevant right now to South Asia, and I think also increasingly relevant to the world. To begin with, I think the subject of this conference, when we look at what we call harnessing resources, I would say that there are many different kinds of resources that come to mind. I think you've addressed some of those resources right now. You've talked about natural resources in many different ways. But broadly, when we have a look at the other resources that we have to consider when looking at South Asia and looking at the rest of the world, it includes people resources. It includes what I would call strategic resources by positioning. And it also includes financial resources. And what I would say very broadly, having heard the speakers today, the early speakers that talked about, rich and long history, we heard, additional speakers, talk about, the natural resources and how they can be harnessed. We've talked about climate. We've talked about rivers. What I would say is that a lot of what we look at as resources is actually what I would term very broadly as stock measures, not flow measures. But the effectiveness in how we use these resources is what we would call as flow measures. Now, one flow measure that people talk about as an indicator, and by no means am I suggesting that that is the perfect measure of flow and the ideal measure of flow. It's a metric called GDP, which is gross domestic product. So that is a flow measure, what a country achieves in its year, in a year. But as we look at that measure, that is one measure to measure the effectiveness of how effective a country or a nation is in using the stock that it has. Whatever those natural resources are, how effective it is. So when we look at South Asia, the report card on South Asia is actually not that great. So when we look at South Asia relative to the rest of the world, on a per capita GDP basis, we are still at less around $2,000, about 1/5 of the world average. The global average right now is slightly north of $10,000. So very clearly, this is a much needed conference on how we can be more effective in harnessing resources, because as has been rightly pointed out by multiple speakers, we have a very rich legacy and past. So it's not like we have not done it in the past. We also have tremendous amounts of natural resources, but it is how effectively we can harness these resources that can be a huge change and driver of South Asia. We've also had some talk, I think, on this panel already by the earlier speakers in the prior session on how urbanization is one very significant driver of creating the efficiencies of agglomeration to start driving, our flow metrics much better, which is bring the efficiencies that the rest of the world has achieved. And on that metric also, I can say that the South Asia is far behind the world averages in terms of the level of population living in urban areas. So it is sub-captured, and even our urbanization that has taken place, so much of it has been unplanned, that a focus on how to make these more efficient, the unplanned, for example, in Delhi, 47% of the population lives in what they would call irregular or unplanned colonies. They were called slums a long time back, but now it's called informal development in modern terminology and is gradually getting formalized, but perhaps not in the best way. So when we look at the huge variation within South Asia, I think that we should not be drawing conclusions as to whether those strategies that have been utilized within South Asia are a reflection of what could be sustainable in the future. And here is where, when we look at the variation in South Asia, we have a country like the Maldives, which has multiples of the average of South Asia per capita GDP. It's followed by Sri Lanka, which is also very high in per capita GDP. And then, of course, we have Bhutan, and then subsequently India. But when we overall look at it, some of these strategies that have resulted in very high per capita GDP might be driven by factors that are more volatile. If it's a tourism-driven strategy, all of that. So very high concentration risk, creates risks of its own. So very broadly, when I look at the big themes for South Asia, just given our stage in terms of development relative to the rest of the world, I would say that a very, very strong theme should be infrastructure and urbanization should be two very, very significant themes. The fact that we are just 20% of per capita GDP suggests that our level of organization to harness those resources is not most effective. The second, I would say, is looking at how to make our enterprises more competitive. When we look at resources, all of them, all the resources that we talked about, the natural, the people, the strategic, all of those, they can be harnessed by three different sectors if you use a different lens. One would be the government, one would be the private sector, and the third would be the sort of non-profit NGO sectors. And I would say the thrust in terms of driving a lot of this growth should be placed on the private sector, because the resource mobilization in the private sector can be the greatest. Now, the government itself right now, I think, has been a very significant part of resource mobilization historically in South Asia, across the South Asian countries. But gradually, as the private sector evolves, I think the focus should be far more on policy and playing an enabling role, reducing the sort of regulatory and compliance burden, and beginning to ensure that the resources are getting harnessed in the right way by the private sector. And to some extent, I think civil society or the non-profit sector or the non-government sector can play a role in sort of improving the quality of the discourse in how these resources are mobilized. So I'm just throwing some of these broad thoughts out there as the first speaker of this discussion. Don't want to elaborate too much on any one of them, based on what the other speakers are going to be talking about. I think we can continue discussion. But these are some of the things I wanted to throw out there in terms of where our focus should be. From where I'm looking at things, what the path ahead is, and how to ensure that these countries, when you come together, an agglomeration like South Asia, the greater and faster we bring down the barriers between our countries, the faster that we can grow, similar to a Europe, which found that the next leg of its growth about 20 years ago came by bringing down its borders. So to work on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ajit ji. It was really a pleasure to cherish views shared by you. Now I would request M. Anwar Hussain ji, Executive Chairman, Sindhi Limited and Asia Regional Director at BRAC International, Bangladesh. Sir, please.
Thank you, Honorable Chair of this session. I think this is indeed my pleasure, and I'm truly privileged to have this opportunity to be here. Of course, to learn from all of you. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. So even before starting, I would really like to thanks our honorable patrons, Dr. Bishwajit Rai Chaudhary, founder chairman of SAIARD, and of course, Professor Pina Goda, director SAARC Cultural Center. Again, this is my pleasure. As I said, that this is great learning opportunity for me from all of you. Also, I'd like to thanks and to learn from distinguished speakers. I would like to address the ladies and gentlemen present here. A very good afternoon. Yeah, this is afternoon. I think in South Asia, we have common issues among countries. Also, we have differences. And again, the topic we have selected is economy. On contrary, economy basically relates to multi-sector. Multi-sector, not only even the economic sector. Multi-sector means when we talk about economy, immediately we can talk about sustainable economy. When we talk about economy, we need to keep it in our mind that there are 5 fundamental aspects, at least, should be taken into consideration. Of course, the economy itself. And then we have included the terminology resource mobilization. And the third element that I would say that with all your efforts, if we are effectively able to strengthen the economy, but if there is gaps in terms of addressing the inequality aspect, if we are not effectively able to address the social dimension, social welfare, through taking different sort of approaches, there are approaches, proven approaches. So the third element, and fourth is of course the green economy, also environmental aspects, and again the climate change burning issue, and then collectiveness, regional cooperation. So these are the kind of fundamental elements I just wanted to highlight here to be taken into account, that if we really want to talk about the economy, the strengthening economy, and then for resource mobilization. But as an overarching point of view, we need to think of that our objective is to make sure the social welfare and to serve the nation, to serve the people. That is the overall objectives of the economy. So now, why did I say that? I would try to be specific, but again, I just wanted to share this. The reason is I believe economy itself, of course, is a subject, economics, but at the same time, economy always should be culture and context based. Culture and context based. The reason I'm saying this, uh, context itself does matter. I will provide one example, but this is also should be considered from the lens of the culture, common culture and diversity. And from that ground, this is, I would say, that the burning issue and the topic that you have selected. And in terms of organizing the event, I think SAARC Cultural Center from that ground is the right choice. They have taken the initiatives. I would like to thanks again. Now, in relation to, I'll try to address the resource mobilization aspect. I think topic we have selected is strengthen the economy of SAARC nations through resource mobilization. So when we utter the term resource mobilization, automatically I think we really need to consider, of course, the government part, but again, government part mostly, of course, they will have the system, but there are some terms that we need to take into account. One is investment. So this is private sector investment. Of course, we, as a country, we have the options for having loan from multilateral institutions, in particular from the Bretton Woods institutions, World Bank, IMF, ADB. So then the social dimension of it, of course, we need to consider it the grants, and there are multiple options, solicited grants, unsolicited, and from the different foundations. Since we are talking about resource mobilization, even earning should be part of it. From that ground, I think export is important indicator that we need to think of. Again, I will not go for that much details considering the time limitations. But again, from the, in particular from South Asia, as we understand that our, I think we have both kind of scenario in terms of our economy. From that ground, remittance is also very important because someone already mentioned that it's 180, I think, billion. So ultimately population in South Asia. So we are the major part even in considering the global community or population. So remittance should be another instrument. Now the era of, I would say, e-commerce and government part, I think effective and inclusive tax administration is important. Institutions to capture global resources. Also the foreign, I think, foreign, in fact, our people who are in abroad, each of them are kind of ambassadors. Now, if I really want to analyze the context, public-private partnership, since I have been working there under Prime Minister's office, so public-private partnership is really important. So in South Asia, the major problem is even not only the bureaucratic complexity, even you cannot really have the services from one institutions. So the important part for resource mobilization, even for South Asia, is to have that facilities, to have the access of services from one stop. So that is how, and that is why in different countries, they are now establishing institutions to facilitate the process of welcoming the overall investment from both private sector and government sector, but at the same time, service has to be really an issue. In relation to SAARD, I will take 2-3 minutes at the last, but before that, I'm talking about mostly on the resource mobilization issue. Because from my experience, Bangladesh is going through, I would say, a double graduation process. Of course, we have achieved the status of lower middle income country. Just taking, while I am talking about South Asia, I'm taking one example, like in Bangladesh, as I said, that we have commons and we have differences. So again, we have been declared as a developing country, like considering the not only the per capita income, addressing the human capital, also reducing the economic vulnerability by diversifying the source of income. So in South Asia, of course, one important point is human resources, but the gap as at the same time we have the gaps in terms of skill. So in terms of remittance, we have that gap. So in relation to the loan from the multilateral institutions, I think we really need to consider that if we really want to mobilize those resources, even the loan could be a resource if we are effectively able to utilize by our own capacity. But the problem is there is huge gap that from the South Asian people, we really cannot effectively able to utilize the resources of loan that we are having from multilateral institutions and not being able to effectively utilize by engaging ourselves. So that is a fundamental point I just wanted to mention. I think global community, the commitment that they have made, there is huge gap. So collectively from South Asia, through economic diplomacy, we really need to raise this voice collectively, and that is the scope of our work globally. That you have made the commitment that you have made for developing country, even for South Asian countries like. So you will have to make sure that, so the economic diplomacy is really important. In addition to that, I'll take another 2-3 minutes. So the export part, as I said, even in whole South Asia, on an average, the statistics said that more than 90% are small and medium enterprise. So the important focus, even in next few decades, will have to be for a small and medium enterprise and link them to the export level, so that macro industry level we have the focus, but at the same time, SME is an area where we need to keep our attention to make them able to not only the bankable, to make them able to export. I'll take another 1 minute in terms of analyzing the resource mobilization aspects. But globally, even in developing countries, there are many initiatives they have taken, which is crowdfunding. But in terms of in South Asia in particular, I think few of the initiatives have been taken and have become successful in India mostly. But in other countries, this is the time to take some initiatives. And again, the bond, both international bond and domestic bond could be a source. But last comment that I would like to make in relation to resource mobilization, which is fundamental, that making our public administration relates to income tax. So that has to be inclusive and effective. In relation to resource mobilization, by placing or talking about 2-3 recommendations, I'll finish that. Then only then I will just address one aspect, which is regional cooperation. I'll not take so much time. Within 2-3 minutes, I will finish. So 5 major points that basically I thought of is truly important from the government part, but at the same time, the private sector investment is really important. One is we really need to think of formulate the appropriate fiscal policy. So someone talked about that policy review is important. So which will lead to a just and equitable tax burden with a progressive broadening of tax base. The second point, as I mentioned earlier, that we need to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of revenue administration, including both technical and management skills and human capital enhancement. Also, enhancement international cooperation in tax matters through the negotiation of bilateral tax treaty, including provision for the exchange of information, also mutual assistance, methods of eliminating double taxation, since we are talking about the regional cooperation as well, and promoting the equitable distribution of taxation among competing jurisdictions, that is different countries. So, but in relation to SAARD and the SAARC Cultural Center, I'm just trying to focus on that. I think this is a bigger subject because one of the professor, he was very much focused on access to and control over natural resources, and also effective management of natural resources, the regional cooperation about natural resource. So I'm not going to focus on that, which is really important in terms of even addressing the poverty aspects, eradicating poverty. This is important, that we need to create access to and control over natural resources for the poor and extreme poor people, which will ultimately contribute to eradicate the poverty, ultimately contribute to the economy of the countries. So the focus that I am going to conclude with saying that we really need to think of regional level kind of body to policy advocacy, which is important, that review some of the policies which are kind of creating barriers, because those who live in developing countries, even countries like Bangladesh, India, we understand two aspects. One is corruption, and then second is, of course, the bureaucratic complexity, with due respect to the government officials present here. So these are the fundamental challenges, even creating the working environment or the business environment, or for contributing towards the economy. So now, in relation to SAARD, I think we need to come up with an action plan in terms of identifying some of the major instrumental action point that will collectively take forward, at least for next 1 year. So I'm done. Thank you very much for listening to me. I think the regional level, some of the action points we need to think of, and mostly the policy advocacy aspect, because otherwise this is beyond our kind of capacity. Thank you again for allowing me to talk before you.
Thank you, Anwar Hussain ji. Yes, we agree that SAIARD, Biswajit ji has taken up a huge challenge, very apt, very need of the time topic to be discussed and recommend a set of some suggestions or maybe policies to be executed. Would be very happy to invite Mr. K. Siddharth, strategic thinker, earth scientist, and advisor to the government. So please.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving this privilege of being with you. Thank you, Vishwajit. Thank you, Dr. Upadhyay, for introducing me so well, and Antaraji as well, and all of those distinguished people who are present in different capacities in this place. I imagine growth and development plus resource mobilization is best achieved when society, economy, local wisdom and aspirations of the people, strategic, experiential and identities match. If they do not go into match, it leaves a lot of cluttering in policy making, a lot of disability and anomaly in policy and its implementation. It leaves a lot of anomaly between what different type of policy makers belonging to different regions go on to think. Incidentally, SAARC nations are out of sync of them. All of them were part of India at one point of a time, once having an unmasked historical and cultural treasure. Of course, enormous amount of local wisdom and knowledge. But then that was pulverized during medieval invasion, and also some of the rules superimposed with the British colonial subversion. And a lot of has been disrupted, and a lot has been almost dilapidated in this case. While the resources remain, while the wisdom remains, while the people remain, while the thinking remains, but then since there has been some amount of a superimposition, either constitutionally or through policy making, or in the name of, or in the garb of so-called globalization, that has created a lot of anomalies. As long as these anomalies exist, it is always going to be an issue associated with resource mobilization and bringing development into the forefront. We'll keep on growing, we'll keep on changing, but whether development will going to take place with a lot of sustainability aspect, that will leave a question mark. Now, most of these anomalies are reflected in and that reflected in the prevalent thinking. Now, imagine one of these type of a thinking is an economic identity versus a Western identity. The economic identity of most of these countries happen to be associated with a decentralized development, using the local resources, using local wisdom, using the skill of the local people, using a variety of type of techniques and technologies associated with it, including in India, some of them what we're going to be calling it as a jugaad technology. It also goes on to be getting itself reflected in the form of the way economies are managed at the local level and at different aspects as well. But then when we are talking about a centralized economy with an attendant emphasis on creating a brand, increasing the size of the economy, increasing its brandability, increasing the various ways by way of which certain things can be produced on a very, very large scale, that is always going to be bringing both of these aspects into conflict. Now, this prevalent thinking in anomalies and in a certain type of mismatch is reflected in agriculture development as well. Prior to a lot of aspects, in fact, that is going to be still prevalent. This anomaly is going to be ecological versus colonial farming. Now, imagine there used to be a leguminous crop in the whole of the Gangetic Plain region, mostly dominating Bihar and West Bengal, and also some portions of Bangladesh as well, Kesari, which was having a property of fixing nitrogen to such an extent that the amount of nitrogen needed by the agriculture farm was no more required once this ZAD crop, I repeated, ZAD crop was grown. That means during March and April. Now, it was removed from the agricultural scenario in the wake of a branding in the farm, in the wake of a narrative that was built up to promote a Western farm of a chemical fertilizer-based farming. And then the result was India itself had to shell out no less than 1 lakh crores of rupees every year, only because it was ecologically dominant. Now, most of the Western farming techniques do not go on to be having that type of a outlook, except, of course, now onwards, that they are promoting ecological farming. And then this has already damaged. There are some of these things which are already existing in the rural areas of SAARC countries. The third thinking had been in the notion of industrialization. Industrialization in Western parlance has been synonymous to large-scale manufacturing, while industrialization in most of these SAARC countries have been associated with a process of value addition to psych, skill, resources, management, as well as to the scalability aspect. Now imagine it was a process of value addition to how is it that people can go to think, a process of value addition to how is it that you enhance your skill, how is it that you utilize your almost all of those type of prevalent skills, a process also of utilization of the resources, not exploitation of the resources. And there was a fundamental difference between both of them. There has been this type of a thinking has been in form of transportation as well, in variety of forms of a way that we used to be transporting it. Now, how is it that Bangladesh could have benefited out of the decline of the inland water transportation is left to anyone to imagine. And the same thing goes with Pakistan as well, Afghanistan as well, and to an extent Nepal as well. Now, this has been replaced with high-speed transportation, but then unless this problem is going to be sorted out in this manner, and unless that is going to be brought in sync, both of them are going to be connected, the problems will go on to remain the way it is. Governance associated aspects are always a part of it, because the previous government and of course a lot of people going to manage it in this manner. That is what we can go to call in India as Samaj Satta, while most of the management and governance in SAARC countries have been imposed in the form of a democracy, better be called as a mobocracy, of course, in this case. The management of the environment in this case as well. While a management of environment has been in the dominant form, like talking about a better ecology is better economics. That has been with almost all of these SAARC countries. But then economics has taken a precedent, and GDP-based economy has taken precedence over a lot of things. Our GDP-based economy is something like you pollute the environment, you increase the GDP. You increase crime, you increase GDP. You also go on to kill people, you increase GDP, and then you go to manage it, you again going to increase GDP, and then you complicate the situation, you again going to increase the GDP, and so on and so forth. So that has been a dysfunction that has been always there. And that's been because of the superimposition of the Western motivated information management over this a form of a local management and local wisdom. This is largely because of a thinking. Like that is, SAARC countries people are endowed with, and naturally endowed with, most of them still, and that is going to be there, except for the present generation, linear thinking, a design thinking. While the thinking that has been imposed over them has been mostly linear. That is economy, and economy, and that is an example of linear thinking. Otherwise, there was no way that so-called industrialization and industrial revolution would have created so much amount of a problem associated with carbon dioxide. It was never associated with it. And this is largely a product of such type of a thinking. So what it has done is that all of this has stimulated resource mobilization. That's why we're going to talk about a pull-based design thinking dominated strategy. And when you go on to talk about the future of it, you understand it. This future will go on to become better. First is by recasting a strategic consideration. Now, recasting a strategic consideration basically means that not putting one against the other. Like what some of these countries like south of India, we have been trying to do it, putting China and India together. And that has resulted in almost a complete dilapidation of the economy in this case. Now, such type of pitting against each other without building a social capital, without building a strategic base, in this case, has always been a problem. Unless recasting of the strategic constitution is taking place, there is no way that resource mobilization will go on to take it further. Second has been that is a complementarity in resource sharing. Such type of a complementarity in resource sharing is essential because they all have been part of the same country at one point of a time. So consequently, they have a similar type of a geographical base, a similar type of environmental base over which they can go on to do it. Of course, that will go on to require a specialization to a large extent or to a small extent of sorts. Now, coupled with it, it has to be realized, it's a high time that is we are going to be realizing it, that dollar is something that is going to be declining in due course of a time. It is just a matter of time. That is that given the current geopolitical situation in the whole of the world, with an avowed aim of allowing dollar to be dismantled, it is essential that these countries represent themselves through soft power projection. And this soft power projection cannot be delinked from India at all, because India will always go on to be at the forefront of a soft power projection. And this soft power projection will go on to help Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, all of them, because they are intrinsically linked to the products, intrinsically linked to the skills, intrinsically linked to the management aspect of it as well. The fourth will be associated with sharing of a space economy and a space technology. In this case, they have to understand that they are privileged to have one of those countries very nearby with a launching center very, very close to that of equator in Sriharikota, and one that can go to launch satellites at the cheapest possible rate. And India will be at the forefront of a space revolution, and it will go on to become a leading country that way. It's just a matter of time. So these countries have to give a space so that a space technology can go on to solve a lot of problems that technology has created. And two more aspects associated with it. One is providing access to the Indian Ocean Rim countries, for which all of these countries will come together. If they do not go on to come together, what will happen is it will go on to become a zone of perennial conflict with India, with Bangladesh, with Sri Lanka, all of these countries. Now, why is it that Afghanistan should be shorn of taking advantage of the northern side of Indian Ocean and that of Arabian Sea? And that can happen only if access to Indian Ocean is going to be shared by one of them. The security of Malacca Strait and Bab el-Mandeb, as well as the Hormuz Strait, goes on to be the joint responsibility of all of them, rather than pitting some of these superpowers or powers in this case. And to last it, there must be some amount of enhanced cooperation with respect to disaster management, as Rajiv Mishra ji was talking about. Now, such type of an enhanced management in disaster management has been taken, an initiative has been taken by India. And one can imagine the example of Mozambique One can imagine the example of Zimbabwe, where India had been very instrumental, and also, of course, giving this prior information to Bangladesh as well, how exactly that they can go to manage it on a cyclone forecasting, and how is it that they can go to actually manage the technology of protecting themselves in this manner. Now, understanding the power projection and separating religion out of their state policy will go a long way in trying to bridge this type of an anomaly, in trying to bring all of these aspects into sync with each other. Unless it's like an individual whose mind is going to be cluttered by what he wants to project and what he is. So his mind is always going to be cluttered, and consequently, the investment of thinking that is required in trying to forge ahead, in trying to move ahead, is always going to be a problem. It is also going to be with countries as well. Unless these countries go on to sort out this aspect, unless they understand that they have to be in sync with each other, economic growth will go on to take place, development will never go on to take place. And that will go on to take place also, even if it takes place, it will only be at the cost of their base, that is ecology. We have to understand that ecology will go on to be our forefront. It is our resource, it is our heritage, and ecology is what will go on to determine our cultural ethos as well in the coming days. That is how we can go to end. Thank you, all of you, for having given me this opportunity. Thank you, Vishwajit. Thank you, Upadhyay, for giving me this much amount of time, introducing me so well. Thank you.
Thank you, Siddharth. It was really a great pleasure to listen to your views. Wonderful it was. Yes, thank you very much. I would request now Dr. Chris Soteropoulos for sharing his views. So please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, fellow panelists, organizers of SAIARD and SAARC. This is an important forum, and even though I am located in a land far away but friendly in Australia, I've learned a lot about some of the strategic priorities and also some of the hurdles that need to be managed in resource mobilization. The focus that I will introduce is one of lived experience that we have in our organizations and our peer networks around the world, which includes SAIARD. What we are interested in doing is seeing a better community. Now, you might say, okay, well, it's a wonderful statement, but how do you do that? Well, we believe that there are pockets of technology, there are pockets of expertise, there's pockets of funding, and there's pockets of partnerships which can be leveraged from around the world. The market is not India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Southeast Asia. It is global. Mobilization of, as we said, technology, expertise, funding, and partnerships can occur in an emergency situation, natural disasters, and we've seen in many of those occurrences how people and mobilization occurs from the international community. Secondly, it can occur through strategic priorities. There is a particular issue, whether it's water management, food security, climate change and its impacts, education, and other mechanisms exemplified by the SDGs, which can form strategic priorities in your region, your community, your ecosystem. And the one after that is the non-strategic priorities. Now, even though we talk about emergency requirements, strategic priorities, and non-strategic priorities, within those three categories, you're able to leverage international sources of, as we said, technology, expertise, funding, and partnerships. We live across that international environment, and we're constantly partnering technology for a particular environment. technologies might sit within a business-to-business environment, but we're able to morph them with local contextualization needs for a developing country, for an NGO. Doesn't necessarily have to fit within the same stream. And the message is that I think SAIARD and SAARC is well placed to form within its armamentarium a division which seeks to provide a clearinghouse for both need and resource mobilization from different parts of the world. Let me give you some examples of what we've done in order to form the context of what I'm talking about. We all know Somalia, an East African country, going through lots of different challenges, as they have been in the last 20 years, but more so today. They have lots of natural resources. They've had a colonial past and the impact that that has created, both in the past, but as the heritage moves forward today, geopolitical issues as well. We were asked in discussions with government, how can systems and expertise outside Somalia be used in order to help our food cooperatives? There are 5 different cooperatives in the country for agriculture, etc. And they said, we have a problem because we would love to develop an export market. We would love to reduce our waste, because refrigeration is not at an optimal availability. We would love to have quality control testing, because we see we have lots of natural products, but we can't even prepare them to take them to the world. Our farmers, our managers, they're not educated, let alone literate. There are no systems, infrastructure, equipment, logistics. Can you help with that? What we said is, let us come back to you. We spoke to the international market, the export market, primarily initially, and we said, okay, well, you've got interests in obtaining some products, whether it's raw products or products which have been processed. What if we were to provide them to you from East Africa, with all of your quality controls, with all of your assurances, safely, on a regular basis? What sort of volumes are you after? That sort of volume. Okay. Then we go back to the Somalis and say, right, we have customers for you. If you can deliver this many mangoes, this much tonnage, this quality control, lobsters, etc., we have markets ready for you. The government said, oh my God, we just asked you to help us with a little bit of education, and now you're validating how the mobilization of resources from the international market, as well as partnerships and funding to build systems nationally, can assist in a sustainable method managed by Somalians. We're not talking about selling resources off to others, for the benefit of employment, if you want to call it political stability, institutional creation, climate change, resource management, and capacity building. There's nothing smart in what we did, but it is a formula which leverages expertise from different parts of the world, including from your region as well. Let me give you a second example. We were approached by a technology provider. They said, we have the ability to, in connection with solar panels and batteries, to create mobility in how energy can be managed. We said that's fantastic. That's on the one side. On the other side, our executive chairman, former professor of entrepreneurship in several institutions around the world, said, I'm going to have a chat to one of my students who runs strategic priorities for a Middle East nation. I'm going to ask him what challenges they have. And this is to the point that was made by some of the speakers, our panelists, but also speakers earlier. Local contextualization is the key. The strategic priorities champion of this particular country, who has the ear of the political class, said, we have a problem. We have a very long coastline, but we are depleting fishing stocks very quickly because of our fishing practices or whatever it is. Okay. We then huddled together as an organization and said, hang on a second, how can we manage this? Is there something that's very, very interesting as a solution? Is there a way to fuse technology and the problem? Well, one of our colleagues said, I think we can use the solar and battery solution. And we all said, well, how do you do that? At the moment, they have fishing and aquaculture, which is linked to roads and the electricity grid. Why don't we make it mobile, where they can set up these fishing environments and processing not near electricity grids? That's their major limitation. So we took that to the government, and the government said, we are rich in oil. If you had come to us with a solar solution, we would have laughed at you and kicked you out of the room. But the way you've packaged the ability to mobilize, or the mobility of these resources, solar and battery, move them around our coastline, configure that with businesses that are able to operate outside the grid. Now there's a solution we can talk about and we can take on. So the message again is mobilization of resources, but using the global environment to call out for solutions. And you don't know where these solutions are. We're working at the moment on a proprietary wind turbine, but not those big ones that have all sorts of problems. Small ones, a couple of meters. Mobile, they can sit on the back of vehicles. They can be placed on the ground, connected with batteries. Imagine what they can do to environments that obviously have wind, but require a backup maybe to diesel, or a replacement over time to diesel. There are mobile internet towers in different islands or regions of, say, the Philippines or other parts of the world. That has a significant and immediate impact on the local community. But that's not good enough, because we want to make sure that the servicing of these pieces of equipment and the manufacturing of these pieces of equipment is not done in some fancy country. It must be done locally. So we are driving the mandate for how commercialization of these technologies and the local contextualization occurs. We've seen many, many billions, I would say, dollars spent on wonderful technologies that are helicoptered in, if you will, into different parts of the world. 3 years later, no one services them. They break down. There's no money for it, or the locals damage it. That needs to be part of resource mobilization, to empower the local community to be part of the solution, but they need to be embedded in part of the solution. It needs to be cultural as well. It's not a case of, oh, good morning, I'm a person in a suit from Australia and I will tell you what you need to do. That's not the model. We've tried it as the West, if you will, and it has led to disasters. Now business schools, I think, are starting to talk about cultural contextualization and even generational contextualization, as part of a resource mobilization discussion. So what we'd love to do is to be part of a discussion, but also an action plan, and we think SAIARD's a magnificent vehicle for this, to bring our networks and their networks and their networks in to solve solutions wherever they are around the world, with some basic rules which many of our fellow panelists and other key opinion leaders in this space in your region will craft in order to embed real changes for a better community. So that's all I needed to say, and I'm looking forward to everyone else's comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. It was really a pleasure to cherish your views. It's a pleasure to invite Dr. Yasin Sameem, Senior Governance and Development Expert, Afghanistan. Is he there, sir? Are you there? Andraji? Dr. Yasin Sameem. Yes, yes, sir.
Most probably, sir, have to late due to some power cut issue.
Okay.
उसने अभी mail किए. That's why. And so we may start for the conversation and regarding the question answer sessions. और हमारा कुछ question अभी आया है, मैं आपको share कर रहा हूँ. So you can start this question answer, and after that we will go for the validity. Antara, have you shared the questions to ma'am?
No, sir, not yet, sir. So,
Okay, I'm sorry.
like I.
Oh, okay. So, Upadhyay ma'am, you may continue. I am asking the questions on behalf of our institutions. So, no, I will.
Okay.
The questions are there.
So, shall we go for the question answer session first, or we'll have the conclusion of the session first? Choice is yours.
I think it will be better if we conclude that session, and after that we'll.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much, Dr. Bishwajit ji and SAIARD Kolkata, for making me a part of it. And it was really wonderful experience to witness people participating, experts across SAARC countries participating, presenting their views. Ajit ji was there, talked about various kinds of resources, be it people, strategic, financial resources, etc. I talk about stock measures and flow measures. He also emphasized on GDP status of South Asia and in GDP resource mobilization in particular ways he elaborated on, where economic, sustainable economy, even he talked about government, private sector and NGOs role of them also. All these things when Ajitji was speaking, I could, all of us could witness that how he has passed through the experience and all the, possibly he has very closely witnessed the process of the things. Anwar Hussain ji talked about 5 fundamental principles and culture, context-based economy. He also talked about population as one of the important factors in South Asia, when especially we talk about the economy and mobilization of resources. He also talked about role of NRIs or diaspora in mobilization of resources or growth of economy in SAARC. Public-private partnership, role of the same, and export level with special reference to SMEs he talked about. His suggestion was there should be a committee to review the policies to make certain changes. Siddharji was there with matching of many more traits, dreams, and goals. SAARC, with all the countries we were part of India once, and how now they can be connected, what are the problems they've been facing, and especially he focused and elaborated a lot on the solutions also. So set of anomalies associated with resource mobilization he talked about. Especially he talked elaborately on the ecological and Western method of farming and how, what are the changes are required. Government associated aspects also he discussed upon. Wonderfully, he also put forward few facts and factors, how they are associated with increase of GDP, whether they are welcome, to be welcomed or not. He also touched upon those things about linear thinking, linear economy, industrialization and its impact, soft power projection, So it tried to cover many more aspects. Chris, it was really a pleasure to see that you just started discussion with pockets of partnership, funding, technology, expertise, those things how. And he himself shared his own experiences. And he looked at it as a global economy, global mobilization problems, resources, and how they can be solved. Especially his experiences sharing really led us to certain conclusions also. It was really a pleasure to be a part of the session as a chair. And surely at the end of the day, when we'll be there after the question answer session, your all efforts with a huge, great vision, Bishwajit will yield to certain wonderful conclusions. Thank you very much. We may move forward for the question answer session. Biswajit ji, you will move forward with the question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you for your wonderful session, the chair, and especially all the panelists, those who have delivered on the different issues, raised the different points, particularly for the how to strengthen the concept of the SAARC economy. And we are really humble to all of them. So several questions have came to us before the sessions we have started. So I would request to Antara to start this question answer sessions to our panelists. After that, we will go for the valedictory session. Thank you. Over to you, Antara, please.
Yes, sir. This question is for Mr. Ajit Pai. So, to what extent do we need paradigm changes and changes on the notions of industrialization, development, etc.?
Can you just repeat that question?
Yes, sir. Sure, sir. To what extent do we need paradigm changes and changes on the notions of industrialization, development, etc.?
So I think that's a very, very good question. The reason why we should ask that question is a lot of people make the assumption that the path that has been followed so far and succeeded is the one that we should follow. But the world today is a very different place than the world in 1980. So for example, when you look at China's development, it was an industrial driven development. And all of us look at that as a model where we say that China went to being the same per capita GDP as South Asia in the early 90s to a per capita GDP that is 5 times South Asia's today. But if we look at the China model, the reason why it is not likely the model that India can follow or South Asia should follow is mainly because of one sort of factor, which is that when China started its manufacturing driven growth, China was less than 5% of global steel production. Today it is 60% of global steel production. When China started its aluminum in the early 90s, its industrialization, it was less than 5% of aluminum production. Today it is over 50% of global aluminum production. When China started its APIs on the pharmaceutical and chemical side, it was less than 5% of global. Today it is over 60%. Does the world really have room for another player as big as India to have two players that are more than 60% of global market? So very clearly, when China did it, it was a cost arbitrage with the OECD and the developed world, where China could do things cheaper because its labor costs were cheaper, massive industrialization at scale, which is what I think one of the other speakers has objected to, saying that this scale of industrialization may not necessarily be the best part, but it is there today. So we have huge scale in one economy, which has increased global risk. We need to diversify that global risk, but do we really want to follow the same model of getting to dominant positions in the global supply chain in very large, in the classical model? Perhaps not. So the reason why I gave that example was primarily to say that our model will have to be different because circumstances are different. The developed world is in a different place. Your amount of debt leverage in the world, today the world debt to GDP is 360%, unprecedented. The OECD countries' growth rates have slowed down. The largest part of the globe has slowed down. So the kind of solutions that you'll have to provide going forward may not be driven by the same factors as rising trade globally that was the case over the past, until 7 or 8 years ago as a percent of global GDP. It will have to be driven by different factors. The visibility of the sustainable development goals and climate, focus on climate and sustainability is also increased. So the economics of going through an industrial sort of driven development have also changed. So a vast majority of these changes would have to be considered. But one factor that I would still encourage South Asia to look at, I know that there were comments by Mr. Siddhartha on that, but the basic block of agriculture, India and South Asia, still over 40% of the population is engaged in agriculture, while best practices around the world is less than 1% of a population can feed the entire country and have excess left for exports. So this is one area where I would say that even though, there are certain things that come with scale in agriculture, like, we might not want to follow the same level of pesticides and artificial fertilizers, all that. There are certain benefits that come with scale. The average land holding for an Indian handholder of being less than 2 acres does not lend itself to even basic mechanization and is also below sub-economies of scale. So some level of consolidation across South Asia would be required. And if you do that consolidation, I think Professor Ramesh Chand, the Niti Aayog, said the fastest way to double the income of farmers in the world, not in the world, but in India, is to half the number of farmers. And I would tend to agree. The question is, where would these people go? So we have to find ways and means, whether it's, some into manufacturing, some into services, but what would these services, what would this manufacturing look like? And of course, I think the urbanization is one area that I mentioned, is because the agglomerations and efficiencies in an increasing global world to be competitive do come from putting people together, in some forms of density, and that's very incomplete in South Asia. So whether it is for services, whether it is for manufacturing, whether it is for, whatever those functions are, as you bring people together, it reduces the pressure in our agriculture, allows larger sort of scale of production, allows greater efficiencies in both sectors. So that's the way I would address, that question that was asked, which is, it's not embracing industrialization the way it was previously. It'll be a different model. You have what they call Industry 4.0. You have a much smarter way. You have other ways that are more distributed to industrialize, and where a competitive advantage would be, just given the structure of our industry, the greater corner MSMEs, might be with a longer tail, which is a higher mix, lower volume mix, coming from India and its structures in India. So it would be different. But do we have to sort of get people out of the primary sector? I would say yes. I would say we need to get better at the primary sector, more efficient, but also we need to get people out of the primary sector if we need to be globally competitive.
Thank you so much, sir. Hopefully, the person who has asked the question has got the answer. The next question is for Mr. K. Siddharth. What can be the role of new forms of governance, such as environmental governance, water governance, to strengthen the economy?
Well, we always going to harp on, I'm going to pick up from the same place Ajit ji has talked about. He did mention me, that is, if my comments will be significant in those places or not. But so far, what we have done is take the case of water management. Our emphasis has been mostly on a structural based engineering approaches, with concomitant building of the dams, reservoirs, and so on and so forth. Now, the amount of destruction and damage that they have done without, again, a concomitant effect on empowering the people in identifying the identities of the people and allowing them to improve upon anything of their agriculture or their livelihood, that is left to a lot of question. Because when you go on to build a dam and a reservoir, you don't only go on to block the flow of the river, you also go to allow the people to move upstream. Now, 20 villages, they move upstream, say, and then the only resource they have in those places is the forest. They go for indiscriminate deforestation. What it does is that it allows a lot of silt to move and starts filling the reservoir. So a reservoir whose life was to last for something like some 300 years, it starts filling it up and ultimately fills up in 75 years of time. So from the angle of cost-benefit analysis, this is one technique or this one form of management of water inserted by the Western countries has not proven good at all. So water governance, if you can go to take a look at it, involving people, educating people, not literating them. I'm talking about educating people about the ingenious methods that used to remain in those places, like some of them in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in India, in Pakistan, and they were ingenious methods where the people themselves used to manage it. There was no need for a centralized water management. So what we require is water governance in this case is a decentralized, empowered water management with a certain degree of a power given to the people and identities who can go on to use their local wisdom for that. If you do not go to do that, we keep on using the centralized water management systems, and it will keep on degrading the environment as well. Now that won't allow us to sustain. So sustainability is always going to be in reference to the people. So the people themselves will not be able to sustain. It's like hitting yourself in some way or the other, and that is going to be the major danger. Now, even with respect to the notions of industrialization, as we talked about, you can go to convert any action, any activity, any type of a thinking into that form. Industrialization is a thinking. It's a thinking concerning a process of value addition. Now, without a value addition to your skill, to your thinking, you may go to have a skill, but then the concomitant attitude is missing in those people, like what has happened in most of the parts of India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, not too much in Sri Lanka, but also in Nepal as well. That is, the attitudinal changes are not tuned to it. So what happens is that they do go on to work, but they work in a very uncoordinated manner. Ultimately, what it goes on to do is that the Western form of industrial growth brings about a lot of demerits to the environment. And who will go to clean the environment? Ultimately, we have to do it. The people will go to suffer. So it's no fun, that is, industrializing them, giving them money, making them sick, and then treating them, and then again having a health governance as well. That is, it is going to be entangled into many complications all in all. So we have to adopt somewhere and a model. We have to develop some model of minimalistic living, which used to be in this place, which will not going to entail a lot of investment of money, which will only go on to entail cooperation among the people. Of course, it looks like utopian, but then anything that goes on to look utopian at one point of a time, that has mankind has been responsible for making them a reality as well. Unless you do it, there is no way we can go on to save these countries. We can go to save the planet as well. And unless South Asian countries happen to take an initiative to save the planet, there is no future for the planet, ecologically, economically, and even from the perspective of peace for the whole of the world.
Okay, so actually, I wanted to ask to what extent strategy considerations and security issues determine the future of economy and resource mobilization?
I will go to answer it in two different ways. Strategic considerations means that you go on to see a common future. Tactical considerations means that you are looking for an immediate gain of sorts. Now, most of the countries in South Asia, for whatever reason or whatever mistakes India has made in the past or any other country has made in the past, they go for a tactical policy rather than a strategic policy. Now, how is it that a tactical policy of allowing China to bring close to Sri Lanka and allow them to control their economy and ports, or even in Bangladesh, will going to be helpful when you are at loggerheads with your main neighbor? How is it going to be possible? Now, it's like what has happened in Ukraine. So what NATO did in Ukraine was they allowed the entire type of changes to take place in the psyche of the people, in the way people used to think, making them anglicize, making them almost Americans, and they were surrounding Russia from every side. Now, if I ask you, if West Bengal tomorrow thinks like giving China a base for building its military, is it that India will go on to see it that way? India will keep on remaining quiet. So that is what exactly is a strategic consideration. Strategic considerations are founded on one basis of perceiving a common future, having a design thinking. Now, Indian Ocean, you cannot go to separate India out of it at all. It's simply not possible, because India is in the throes of building a blue water economy, a blue water navy as well. And when it has a blue water navy, it will go on to move with one aircraft carrier. It will go on to have at least 6 destroyers. It will go on to have one submarine as well. And it will be backed by, imagine, 164 aeroplanes with 7 satellites having a surveillance of it. How is it that you can go on to deal with it? The best thing is to be together, because you have been together some time back as well. Indian Ocean must be restored to SAARC countries, largely because that is going to be the future of Maldives, and that will go on to help a specialization as well. It will go on to help Bangladesh. It will go on to help Sri Lanka. Why is it to allow some other countries to rule it and make a mess of it? And this is what has happened. Once we have given, once any country has taken Diego Garcia, then it is going to be a roller coaster of problems, because everyone will want tomorrow Americans to be out. And the day American dollar is not going to be at that level, and it is going to be just a matter of time. Mark my words, it's going to be only about 7 or 8 years. American dollar has to decline. Or most of the countries have already started doing it so. So it has to be guided by that strategic consideration. Another strategic consideration has to be space. We have enough amount of control over space in terms of technology, in terms of reach, in terms of involvement of the manpower. Tomorrow and its day after tomorrow, it's going to be a matter again of time when India is building a complete city, a space city, within 2,300 acres of a land in Sriharikota. Imagine how many countries and something like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, how will be able to compete it. So you have to share the data that India has to give it to you. You have to share the disaster management data also, and help that India will go to provide it to you. You have to share the remote sensing data that India has to provide it to you. You have to share the knowledge mapping that India maps for you and for your country as well. That makes a strategic consideration. And also, when you go to talk about entering into a conflict, now none of these countries are in a position to enter a conflict and go on to win it. It's very difficult to win. The best thing is to come together. That is what is the strategy. And the strategic consideration will be, in this case, that be together, whatever the differences in terms of religion or perspective or past may be, because only that will go on to make you strong. And share all of this local wisdom, all of this knowledge that India goes on to gain from space. You cannot go on to separate India out of it. You cannot go on to make it simply possible that India will go on to go out of Indian Ocean rim countries. You cannot, it's simply not possible that tomorrow something like 20 or 30 ports are not being developed in Indian Ocean rim countries by India. It's simply not possible. India is doing it so, and India is doing it at a rapid pace. That is what exactly is strategic consideration. And unless that happens, there is no way these countries will be in any position to utilize their resources and also mobilize their resources and also go on to bring a lot of benefit to the people concerned as well.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Next question is for Dr. Chris Soturapoulos. How can soft power be a resource and the role that countries can play?
Soft power, that reminds me of how you interact when you go down to the local grocery, how you interact with the staff there, how you interact with the person selling. If you do a good job through soft power, then you're able to obtain maybe a better quality of produce, better relationships. I know in our international contractual dealings, soft power means that if one of the two parties or multi-parties breaches the agreement, you're not running off to the lawyers or to courts. You're sitting there saying, okay, what is it that we can do to fix these issues? So soft power is essential these days. It's no longer a nice to have. We've seen how soft power, even during COVID, has led to a reorganization of contractual partnerships across different countries. The way, for example, China managed its affairs, and I'm not talking about Australia, let's leave Australia out because that's not soft power at all, that's quite different. But the way China managed its relationships with other partners has led to, we know in India's case, the self-reliance model. A lot of countries now are looking at self-reliance, but in terms of export relationships and import relationships, soft cultural power has led to enormous reconfigurations of technology transfer, funding, import-export relationships, exchange of individuals and expertise. So soft power is, I think, will be more and more important moving forward. We've seen, unfortunately, with the geopolitical fracturing that's occurred in the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years, that the American powers dropped, China's powers coming up, Russia's powers coming up, Europe and, shall we say, Australia and India's relationship is growing substantially for the right reasons, but that is very much based on soft power. So soft power is a good thing, and student exchange, working culturally together, respect of each person's, each region's culture is one path of the future that we need even to manage climate. So I'm a big fan of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Our next question is for Mr. Anwar Hossain. Sir, are you there? I don't think he is there.
I mean, he's there. The name is there in the screen, but I think he has.
Yeah, exactly. He has joined, but I don't. Anwar Hossain, are you there, sir?
Antara, if Anwar sir is not
Yes.
there, then you can ask this question to Amy ma'am also. No issue.
Okay, sure, sir. Okay, sir. So, ma'am, the question is, isn't it high time that realization of indivisibility of SAARC countries culturally, socially, and economically has to follow with that ethos?
Would you please repeat your question? All the possible Anwarji may have a different
Yeah,
answer.
sure,
My
ma'am.
answer might be yes, please.
Sure, ma'am. Isn't it high time that realization of indivisibility of SAARC countries culturally, socially, and economically has to follow with that ethos?
I would say that it's not only applicable to SAARC country. What Chris said, I would further it. It is applicable to every country. Obviously, the SAARC, they have their very strong identity, individuality, and indivisibility. So that should be followed with ethos, all the possible. But again, when we say that there are a lot of difference between values, ethos, morals. So some of the time when we make certain statement or introduce certain policies, when we take certain very strong decisions, that we have to be very careful that we are talking about ethos, not subjective certain morals. I 100% agree that yes, we should.
Okay, so that's all the questions I've got actually.
May I ask a question to Siddharth sir also? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Please,
Sir,
please go ahead.
as a strategist or as a thinker, and resource mobilization sectors and different sectors are there, and as I told in my lecture that there are lots of opportunities in case of environmental resources too. So what is your suggestions regarding how the nations of different SAARC countries can also utilize these resources And as already Ajit sir told that there are several other resources too. So what is your vision, sir? And what should be the strategy to follow the government or the unity of SAARC to utilize this human resource as well as this environmental resource to convert it into the economic resource?
As I understand the question, I think that is the basic question is what type of a strategy will be required essentially for the purpose of building a human resource and which can be converted into an environmental and economic resource. And I am clubbing both of them together, of course, for some various reasons. Now, the first part in this case, if you're going to go for reverse planning and if you go on to insert design thinking in this case, incidentally, I do take design thinking classes and experiential economic classes in Dubai, Sydney, and Singapore for management students in this case. I have been there. Now, I'm going to frame a roadmap for that purpose. The first roadmap in this case is you have to pick up people who are going to be amenable to such type of a change. It's not too difficult also. You're always going to find people in the rural areas or other areas whom you can go to categorize and whom you can go to classify. I'm just going to give an example. In the week of the COVID pandemic, there were a good number of migrants who thronged into one area in Bihar, that was Champaran. So of course it was that they were all feeling a problem because they were labor groups and they had nothing to eat, nowhere to go. One of the administrators in that region, he asked all of them, what is your skill? What is your skill? So in a sense, what he did was that he surveyed all the skill of the people. And after having surveyed it, he classified all of these skills. And after having classified it, it provides an ecosystem for all of these skills to flourish. Now, let's understand this part. This is something is what exactly is required for Bangladesh, for India, for Nepal, and for other countries, because these people go on to grow in a different type of agroclimatic conditions with a different type of an iconography, under which their culture has evolved, their thinking has evolved, their creativity has evolved, and everyone goes on to be almost dexterous in some type of a skill. The attitude may be absent in this case, but the skill is there. What you have to imbibe in those people is an attitude whereby they can go on to work together. And once you have done that, it's like saying in a very general parlance, a personality development for these people. Because once they go on to have this type of an attitude of working together, building their own social capital, what will happen is they will start congregating in the form of building a big resource base. And that will go on to be one form of industrialization. You are picking 100 people known for one type of a resource, one type of a skill, and they're producing one type of a product with some amount of a difference. You're not going to require large scale industries for that purpose. That is going to be number one. Now, when these people are going to be working with certain things, like let's say even in India, I'll go to take example from India. Everywhere in India, the basis of rural industrialization is agroclimatic condition. For example, wherever mulberry is grown, you'll want to find silk being grown. Wherever Bhadarwa and Bhadarwal sheep are going to be reared, that is where you're going to find a shawl industry being developed, that is in Himachal Pradesh. And wherever you're going to find a lot of trees who are bearing soft wood, that is where a carving on wood is going to be developed. Wherever you're going to find the region being so dry, like in Kutch and adjoining regions, what the people have done is that they have developed ingenious techniques to take salt out of it, like Agaria people, as we are talking about. So it's an ingenious material. No machine, nothing is going to be used in those regions. So we have to minimize machine. That is number one. Second part is we have to dwell upon people on the type of dwellings that they go on to build. Now, what is happening in most of the rural areas in India, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, is that people are imitating the Western form of house building and dwelling building. When you go on to build something which is built of concrete in a rural area, imagine the problem that you will start inviting. One of the problems is that the walls will go on to get heated, and in 45 degrees centigrade of a temperature, it's almost it's almost impossible to live in a rural area in India. But this is the problem that they have themselves created. The housing used to be made of mud. It used to be made of bamboo. So it was naturally cooler in those places. Now the people will go on to go for buying something like a cooler, electricity, and then in the next stage, air conditioner. Now air conditioner means, take an example of Delhi, with almost 1 crore air conditioners working in Delhi, the nights of Delhi also going to look like there is a loop blowing out of it in this case. Now that is the condition. It's not livable at all. It's not at all livable unless you go to actually convert into energy intensive society. Now energy intensive society means you create a problem, then solve another problem, then solve something else, then solve something else. Ultimately you'll run up. You're going to talk about use of lithium. You're going to talk about even the use of hydrogen. What you will ultimately go on to do is that you'll keep on producing energy, and a byproduct of energy is heat, always going to be there. Now, trying to build a sustainable society, trying to build a sustainability, you have to go back to nature. And for that purpose, you have to have a sight. You have to have a mentality for that purpose. Development doesn't go to comprise that you have a high amount of income and you have a lot of wealth and you suffer from cancer every day and that you're not able to work. This is not development. This is growth. It is going to be change. Development is always going to be holistic. Development is always going to be having a choice. People in rural areas right now do not going to have a choice. And when you're going to be having a choice, that is going to be empowerment. That is what is true empowerment is. A choice of living, a choice of doing a work, and a choice of taking your career, taking your skill in a certain direction, taking it in a manner that is going to be desired. You cannot go on to ask a fish to run in the same manner as a tiger goes on to run. This is what we have been doing in most of urban and rural areas of India. That is largely because we are shorn of the understanding of the psyche of the people, and we're going to dent them also. So that is going to be one of these type of strategies. And then what you have to do is you have to simplify your functionality of working in India. Now the basic problem in India is, and being a scholar, I can always go on to say it, so I do not want to belong to government. The one thing that holds the progress of country is bureaucracy. The only part that is holding the progress of the country is this bureaucracy, nothing else. You can go to have high-class academicians who do not going to be having an identity. And why? Because the bureaucracy, which is a remnant of the British legacy, they are the one whose job is to thwart that type of a development, whose job is to see that they do not go on to grow, largely because they are built up with such type of a psyche. So you have to bring about a lot of change in the way governance goes on to take place in the rural areas. That's the second part. And the third is you have to always go on to think of encourage people who are going to be having innovations. Like take an example, one of those type of hutments that used to be built in Kampuchea is it's made of bamboo. So it is going to be, of course, it's a hutment, it's a hut, but it's made in such a manner that the moment the water comes in that place and the water level rises, it starts floating like a boat. Now, why you cannot go on to build it in some of these regions like Kosi? Why you cannot go on to build in the lower Gangetic plain, even in Bangladesh as well, where these things are going to be required? What you require is only to allow the people to be together. Allow that social capital goes on to be intact in those places. And that is one way of doing it so. And of course, that is going to be strategic planning. And that is going to be a strategic consideration as well. And when Prime Minister Modi goes on to say that he is bound to make India a Vishwaguru, then the concept is use all of this local wisdom. And sooner or later, SAARC countries are going to be falling into that vision. Because there is no way that they can go on to go for a completely super energy intensive society with an emphasis on increasing their income, but at the same time, a walking dead man of sorts with a variety of type of diseases and with a variety of type of problems that is going to be affecting the society in which they're going to live. Unless you are in peace, unless you're going to be having a choice, there is no way you can allow people to grow at all. It's simply not possible. However amount of money you may go to have.
Thank you, sir. And very widely. Yes, ma'am, please.
Yes. Yes, I think you were responding to Siddharthji. Please.
Sorry, I didn't hear Upadhyayji. I didn't hear that part.
Biswajit ji, you were responding to Siddharth ji. Please carry on. I'll join later.
Okay. No, I'm just saying that really it's a very versatile answer he has provided. And ma'am, you please say, and after that, I have just one question to Ajit Pai sir, and after that, we will go for conclusion.
Surely. Anuraji, when you asked, I was add a little bit to what you asked. That in national education policy, Siddharthi, when you were responding, so many things that you were sharing that what I had in my mind. In national education policy, they have emphasized a lot on cultural studies. Many a time, what it exactly happens is that till the time we do not realize, either as an individual or as community or as SAARC countries, we do not realize that what potential, what really treasure that we have, we will not come forward with the confidence or to share that. In national education policy, they have emphasized a lot on languages, literature, even indigenous local knowledge system also. They've talked about Indian Institute of Translation and Interpretation. There again, the languages, literature will be getting due respect. And at the same time, many times it happens that from Gujarat, people don't know what exactly Bengal has or maybe Maharashtra has. So the moment we start knowing India or maybe other SAARC countries, all the possible that indivisibility of this ethnicity will come forward. So somewhere that cultural studies will play a very, very vital role. And I'm very optimistic about national education policy. If it is really executed in its right spirit, I think it will make huge impact. Because with certain background, I have observed that it makes huge difference. Maybe it be Indian classical dance or maybe naturopathy, yoga, NCC, literature, language. No, everything has added something to my personality. And if that happens somewhere, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary study and cultural studies, I think somewhere as a nation and maybe as a collective notion, it will help us. Thank you.
May I respond to that slightly?
Yes, please, sir.
See, that's the basic difference. When you have a country which has 15,000 years old civilization, and why I'm saying it so? Because, of course, that was the time when Vedas used to be in folk, like largely. They were not written because we always used to follow Vachya Parampara, that means it was through speech. And that was 15,000 years ago. And then we had a Ram Rajya, and then it was a Mahabharata, and then it was a Buddhist era, and so on and so forth. It's a different matter that 1,380 years of Indian history has been completely wiped out or removed so that the Indians don't want to feel proud of this fact. Now, having said that, any country that has a 15,000 years of a trial and error of managing people, managing resources, managing its environment, and trying to do a lot of things in a variety of ways is bound to have a treasure. And it is this treasure that people require to know. Now, the only obstruction that I go to see is the perception of a good number of people who are young. And why is it that they don't go to realize these things? Is because of the fact that they have not been taught. They may be literate, but they are not educated. Education is all about values. Education is all about sincerity. Education is all about building social capital. Education is all about getting yourself empowered by empowering other people. Education is all about innovation. Education is going to be all about thinking of the people, thinking of the animals, thinking of the plants. Unless you can go on to co-join with them, there is no possibility that you will always keep on creating a trouble and keep on managing it. Keep creating a trouble, keep on managing it. Like what most of the bureaucrats in Uttar Kashi did was, I don't know whether you know the real reason for it or not. They were given a task to plant trees. So they did plant trees. But what they did was, they removed oak and planted pine trees in those places. Now, pine tree has a lot of leaf litter. Oak is able to bind the soil so much amount, in such a great amount. So when the stream started moving faster, then all the pine trees were uprooted, and that was one of the most important cause for a GLOF related. That means glacial lake outburst flood related flood in that place, and that was how exactly it took a place of a deluge. So we have to ultimately debureaucratize the system. Unless that happens, power is given to the people, and particularly those people who are not only literate, educated people, who understand the essence of a culture. There is culture as a resource, local wisdom as a resource, and the ingenious method by way of which certain things used to be managed, then there is no way we can go ahead at all. Merely building a Western model of managing water resources, managing agriculture, even managing industry has not borne fruit at all. We keep on talking about global warming, and ultimately we keep on warming our atmosphere, keep on melting our glaciers. Then one of these days, the water will going to rise. We'll talk about how to manage the rising water, and that is how the life will keep on going. You will be completely cluttered, and that is not development at all. When you are worried, it's not development. Development is equivalent to being happy. Development is equivalent to feeling good. Development is all about feeling beautiful. It's not about feeling attractive. It's not about that's where the semiotics and the semantics come, and that is where the difference lies. When we talk about dharma and religion, both of these words are not the same. Dharma is your kartavya, your duty as a human being. Religion is something like a dogma, that is, it has a set sort of a protocol that you have to follow. Now, this is also part of education. So when you talk about when you're going to talk about Bhagavan, that also means that environment, as we going to say in Hindustani or in Indian ethos, Karna Karna mein Bhagwan hai. A tree is your God, a river is your God, and that is how we have empowered it. All the rivers in India have been named after girls, and that is an ingenious method of empowering the girls. Except for two rivers, Damodar and Brahmaputra, there is no river that is a male at all. Now, something on which our life is based, we go on to be equating it with women, and that is how we going to be empowering them. Our three goddesses are all going to be women. One of destruction, that is Durga, one of a literary figure, that is Saraswati, and one that is responsible for all the type of destruction, that is Kali. All of them are gods. And one, of course, which goes on to give you wealth, are all women. So empowerment, ultimately, when you have to empower people, you have to give it to the girls, you have to give it to the women. And women in India is not aurat. Aurat is an Arabic word. Women in India are nari. That is nari. Nari tum keval shraddha ho. We have to also understand this part, that whenever we are talking about disasters, then disasters have a meaning in Vedas. And how exactly we going to say it? So if someone can go to follow in Hindi, it Kamaini goes on to begin with it. हिमगिरी के उतुंग शिखर पर बैठ शिला की शीतल छां, एक पुरुष भीगे नयनों से देख रहा था प्रलय प्रवाह। नीचे जल था, ऊपर हिम था, एक तरल था, एक सघन, एक तत्व की ही प्रधानता, कहो उसे जड़िया चेतन. That is the genius of a civilized. India and SAARC countries were civilized. Culture is what we have imported from the West. That is where we have to separate it in terms of semantics.
Thank you, sir. And it's a really wonderful you have explained. So I'm really just locked down with all of your discussions and all that. And my last question, as I told to Mr. Ajit Pai sir, regarding, sir, you are also holding a very important positions in the government of India sector, that is the Niti Aayog, I mean the planning sectors. So you are also working during even the most difficult time the world faces during the pandemic corona situations. And still we have survived and not only survive, we are growing rapidly during this pandemic situation also, and due to the policy for our bureaucracy and policy for the government of India. So as an Indian, I just wanted to know what is your thought that how India can be the role model for the SAARC countries to survive, to develop their economy, to strengthen their backbone also, because we have also seen what is the situation right now Sri Lanka have faced and other countries. So in that perspective, I just wanted to know a brief from your mindset, please, sir.
So I think it's a very good question that you're asking about how India can be role model. And what I would say is that the most important thing that India did during this past 2 years is to see what is relevant to India in its current circumstances, rather than see what necessarily the practices in the world were. So one of those things is what I would focus on would be the kind of reaction that the country where the pandemic began, like China, had about extremely strict controls. Something like that was very difficult for India to do given its structure of government. So we could not follow something like that. But my own view in terms of the development model and what the neighboring countries can learn is, I think, the number one lesson, which I think a number of speakers have alluded to, is that the moment you focus more on what is in common and the common good rather than what the differences are, I think we can make a lot of progress. And one of the approaches that we used, I think, if you look at the first wave of the pandemic, when there are lots of unknowns, and we had to, you had the probably the strictest lockdown in the world for the first wave. You saw that in the second wave, which was actually a much worse wave, that the economic repercussions were not so much, because we said that there's no reason why 2/3 of the districts in the country also had to be locked down when there was no disease that had reached there. So why have extreme lockdown? So we used a more surgical, localized approach. And so automatically we saw that the second wave's economic impact, even though the human cost was very high, much higher than the first wave, we saw that the economic impact was much lower. And the human cost was not necessarily because of that strategy. It was more because as a country, at every level of government, we took things easy because of overconfidence after the first wave. So that, I think, it's like a little bit like the Darwinian analogy. It is not the strongest that survive. It's not the most intelligent or the fastest. It's the ones that are most adaptable to change. So what we should focus on, I think, is what is unique to South Asia. When we look at South Asia, what we should focus on is how, what we can do in our current circumstances, because what's good in some parts of the world might not make sense over here in India. So the kind of fiscal response given in some of the developed countries, it was not required in India, and would create other issues of very high debt like Sri Lanka faced, recently, fiscal issues and very high, liquidity issues. And we should focus on what is actually appropriate for the Indian circumstance. Also, that together, if the SAARC economies look at how we can, what is in the common good of SAARC, and work together towards that. There will always be differences because of how we are positioned. That would help. And I think the one thing that the more concentrated economies on SAARC that also actually happen to have higher per capita GDPs. So you'll see that the Maldives, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan have much higher per capita GDPs than the rest of South Asia. But all of them have very concentrated strategies that expose them to risk. And India, being a much more diversified country, has less. So I think those would sort of be the broad takeaways in addressing your question.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for wonderfully highlighted on that issues. And really, hopefully, we will definitely support the SAARC countries through these notions. So with this, once again, I thanks to all of you on behalf of SAIARD, as I have to come for a Government of West Bengal's program, but still I am listening all your discussions and all that. So thank you once again. Now I would request to Antara to give the vote of thanks and for the session.
Yes, so as we have come nearly to the end of the session, first and foremost, I would like to express my appreciation to the speakers and panelists for their valuable contribution to our webinar on one-day international brainstorming session about strengthening the economy of SAARC nations through resource mobilization. I must mention my deepest sense of appreciation to Dr. A. Upadhyay for chairing the session so wonderfully. I may also like to express our sincere thanks to Mr. Ajit Pai, Mr. Anwar Hussain, Mr. K. Siddhartha, Dr. Chris Soturopoulos. Dr. Yasin Shamim was unable to join, but due to some technical reason, but I also wish him thank you for such informative panel discussion. And my deepest gratitude goes to all who attended the webinar and helped to make it such a successful event. And before ending my closing remarks, I would like to convey a special thanks to all the team members of SAIARD. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you to all of you, and hope I am also looking forward, after hearing this discussion, I am also interested and looking forward to organize a physical event with the all SAARC country members. And I will also request to meet Ajit Pai sir for guide us and also our own mentors in this regard in future. Sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Very much. It was really a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you. Thank you.